In this video, we're going to go over how to actually set up your Debian operating system so we could actually run Koha. So in the last video, we covered how to install your VirtualBox and set up the virtual machine. And now we're going to go over how to actually set up Debian. So if you still don't know how to do that, make sure to watch my previous video that I uploaded last week on how to do that. So with your virtual machine, when you're ready to actually set up Debian, you could go ahead and click Start. And your virtual machine will power up. So the first thing it's going to ask you to do is do what kind of start or install that you want to do. You're going to click graphical install. And if you don't, you can just hit enter. If you don't press any key, it'll just start the graphical install for you. But we're just going to hit enter so you could go into graphical install. Okay, so when you hit graphical install, this should be the first screen that you see to select the language that is going to be on your operating system. Now, this interface screen is a little small, so if you want it to be full screen, what you could do is you could go into view, go into scale mode, and then click switch. And then it's going to take you to full screen like this. Now, there are a bunch of languages here, so you can pick whichever one applies to you and your client based. Because I am from an English speaking country, I'm going to leave mine on English and then click continue. The next thing you want to do is choose your location. They have some locations here, but if you notice that your country is not listed, you could go ahead and click on other, and they will bring up some general regions like Europe, the Caribbean, the Atlantic Ocean, Africa, etc. And then you click on the region that applies to you. In my case, it's the Caribbean, and you just get a list of all the Caribbean countries that this operating system supports. And then click whichever one applies to you. I'm going to click Trinidad and Tobago and then hit continue. Here's where you pick your locale, which is just based on like it's just a continuation of like languages. So I'm going to leave mine on United States and then click continue. But you could scroll through and pick whichever one is best for you. And then you configure your keyboard, and I'm going to leave mine on American English. There's British English, Albanian, Belgian, etc. I'm just going to let this load and scan. Okay, so this is where after all the loading is done and all the network configuration is done, we could continue with setting up a host name for the system. If this is something made for a school or your library, I would suggest having your host name be after your library. So in our case, since this is an example, I'm just going to have it as Koha lib or lib, and then whatever host name you end up choosing, just continue from there. And then you could also put in your domain name. So this is where if you have multiple computers at your library and you should have a domain name, especially if you would have like a server, so you would input the domain name for your library here, but that is at your discretion. So I'm just going to click continue. So here is where we would set up the system administrative account. So if you want to have extra security to your system and you want to prevent unauthorized access, you could set up an administrative account with its own password. And later on, you'll see they'll also ask you to set up a user account. So if you want those two to be separate things, you would create a root password and then a username and user password. But if you know that nobody else is going to have access to it, you could just forego this step and just create the user. I would suggest setting up a proper administrative account, but you could do it to whatever you believe is best for your system. So, because this is just an example, I am going to skip this step and just create a user account. But again, suggest I would suggest that you create a proper administrative account. So here's where you would set up the user account. I'm going to name this user live02, so like the second librarian, and then you can click continue. So they will autofill this, given your user, the name you put for your user account. But if you want a different username, you could set that up too. And here is where you would set up the password for your user account. So this is being run on my home desktop, so there's not a lot of risk for me to get my computer hacked. So I'm just gonna do a regular old password one and then just enter it again to set it up. But obviously, I would suggest making a strong password. They even give some recommendations of a mixture of letters, numbers, punctuation, and you should change it every so often. The interval that I believe is the most suggested is every 3 months or so, and it should not be something so complicated that is too hard to remember offhand, but not something that is so simple that could just be guessed outright. So once you're done setting up your password, you could just click continue. Here is where we would partition the disk. So if you want to use the entire disk, as in the entire disk space we gave to this virtual machine, you could leave it on use entire disk. But if you want to set up a very specific partition, um, especially if you want to use this virtual machine for anything more than just Koha, you could set that up. But I'm just going to leave it on use entire disk and click continue. So it's going to register the amount of space we allotted for this, the hard disk space we allotted for this virtual machine. Here we have 35.3 gigabytes. Now you might say, especially if you're coming from the previous video, this isn't the exact amount. You might notice that this is not the exact amount that we gave the virtual machine. I believe it was around 32.7 or 32 point something um, gigabytes of space. That is fine. Once it's in the general ballpark of whatever storage space or hard disk space you allotted for the virtual machine, then you're good to go to click continue. So this is not like a red flag or anything. Here is where they're going to show you several schemes which you can use to partition your disk. For our case, we're just gonna leave it as all files in one partition since it's recommended for new users. I would also recommend this is if this is your first time setting up a virtual machine and you're not sure what to do and you don't have anybody on staff especially like any sort of network administrator on staff, we could properly set this up for you. But if you want to set it up so a certain partition would just go to your students or your customers or your clients, you could do that as well. That will probably go under separate here with temporary partitions or slash var. But in this case, we're just going to leave all files in one partition and then click continue. So this screen is just showing us how it's going to be laid out, how the operating system is actually going to access the space in our hard disk. If you are okay with what you see here, there's no errors, or if you want to change anything, you could click undo changes to partitions, or you could go back to set it to make any necessary changes. But if everything looks good, you could just leave it on finish partitioning and write changes to disks and click continue. This is um, just doing this screen is just making sure that you are 100% sure with your disk setup, your partition setup. Everything looks good to me, so we're just gonna change it to yes and then click continue. And here they are just installing the base system. This is gonna take a while, so make sure to leave your computer on and I will catch you back when this whole process is completed. Okay, so once all of your files are done downloading, the next step is configuring the package manager. This is for any extra firmware that you might be attaching to the system, but because it's a virtual machine, you don't normally do anything like that. There's no extra installation media that you need. So I would suggest leaving it on a no and then clicking continue. So here is one of the final steps in configuring the package manager. You want to find the mirror of Debian that is closest to your network. There's not a lot of options for me in terms of like Caribbean or anything, so my closest option would be the United States. Just go through the list of countries and pick the one that is most suitable to you. But once you have it, click on it and then click continue. Here is where you actually select the archive mirror. I am going to stick with the official one, which is the one that is always selected first, and then just click continue. But you could do more research into this, into what mirror you think is most suitable for you. Normally, resources for this can be found on the Debian website. So you could always go there to check which mirror is perfect for you. So this is asking for your HTTP proxy. If you have one set up, then they give you a little example of how to input it. But if you don't, you could just click continue. So for me, I'm just gonna click continue. I'm just gonna finish configuring. So it's just finished installing, and right here is a package usage survey. So if you want to answer their survey probably about how easy it was to install this software, you could go ahead and click yes, but otherwise you could just leave it on no and then click continue. Now, this is a very important step because it is choosing the specific software that we are going to install. Once you've clicked web server, you could leave Debian desktop environment clicked and you could leave standard system utilities clicked. The most important thing is that you have web server ticked off and nothing else beyond those three things, and then you click continue. And here is just continuing to finish up that process of installing the software. Once the software is finished installing, you're going to get this pop-up that is asking you about a grub bootloader. So what this basically does is when you power on the virtual machine, it's going to boot into the Debian operating system immediately. So we're gonna leave this as yet because we don't have a bootloader for our drive. It's not really recommended if you have like more than one operating system, but because obviously it only has Debian, it is perfectly okay to have this as yes. So we're gonna leave it at yes and then click continue. So we're gonna click this, and this is just means it's gonna automatically load in to our operating system, and then click continue. Okay, so we've come to the end of the installation process. So as you can see here, there we have to reboot the system, but we also have to take out the installation media. Now, traditionally, this would mean removing the flash drive or the CD, DVD drive that holds the ISO, but in our case, it's going to be a little different. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to take off shut down the virtual machine. You're going to click X and then have it on power off the machine. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to take out your ISO drive. So you're going to want to, first of all, we want to make sure that our optical drive is empty. So we're going to click Start. It's going to power the virtual machine up. And what you could do, you could go into devices, go to optical drives. It will show you the ISO you have, and then you click remove virtual disk. And that's how you would get rid of that. Otherwise, as you saw, probably saw, we had our grub um, boot startup, and it's just going to start everything up for us, and just gonna wait a while, and then our we'll consider it a success if our user screen pops up. So it's up. This is the user that I created, lib02. I'm gonna click on it, enter our password, and there you are. That is how to set up the Debian IS the Debian operating system on a virtual machine. So there's just like a couple of things here that you could kind of go through yourself to kind of do the initial setup. So it's just going through your language, your keyboard setting, privacy. You could either have location services on and off. You could connect online accounts. So if you have a specific Microsoft account or Google account for the school that you want to add, you could do that. And then just some regular housekeeping stuff. We could go into our terminal and then to elevate this user um, to an administrator to do like administrative commands, you could type in sudo c, and then you'd have to input your password. So now, with the root attached, it is now recognizing us as the administrator. So that's what this root is. So just gonna hit exit because we're making sure that everything works. So just exiting out of that to just close off this tab here. Here we have set up our Debian operating system. The next step is actually installing Koha, and we're going to be installing it through the terminal that we just saw there, where we will elevate our user account to an administrator and then doing the chain of commands to get it. Of course, if you've already set up an administrative account on it, you would just use the administrative account to do this. So stay tuned for the next video where I go in how to install Koha.